Welcome back to Let's Play Darksiders, the Abomination Vault, by Ari Marmel. I'm BurningDogFace, and today we're going to be looking at Chapter 14. But before we get started with that, I know I don't normally do shoutouts on this series, but I just wanted to say why I'm here today. See, Darksiders, the series, was originally created by Vigil Games, which is now defunct. But a whole bunch of people who worked there were later hired for a new startup studio called Gunfire Games, and they're the ones that currently own the IP. They were the ones who developed Darksiders 3 and Darksiders Genesis. And I mentioned this because one of their other games is Remnant 2, and the other day I was playing Remnant 2 with my good friend Ronan Drake, there's the shout-out, and we were walking around Ward 13 when I finally noticed this item in one of the shops. Dark Cider Concoction. The label on the bottle bears a recognizable symbol, hinting at some arcane significance. The barely legible text on the label adds to the mystique, with only the words, "Not alone," standing out, leaving the rest shrouded in mystery. This is no drink for a horse. Increases health by 6.66%, stamina by 6.66%, and movement speed by 6.66%. Lasts for 60 minutes and will stay in effect after death. Only one concoction may be active at a time. You know, somehow I didn't get it until I saw actually saw the label in this inspection screen. I didn't get it from the name alone, even when I said it out loud. But it did get me thinking. It's been a while since we read from this book. So here we are. So without further ado, Chapter 14. It's just an angel. Are you certain? Just as certain as I was the last time you asked, Azrael, Death said, and the time before that. I don't see the answer changing any time soon, either. The trio of speakers, the grim riders and the learned angel in his traditional robes of verdant greens and blinding golds, stood gathered on a walkway not terribly far below the absolute peak of the Argent Spire. Everything was dyed in discordant blots of color, cast by the ambient light of the white city streaming through the panes of stained glass across walls of polished silver. It was oddly disorienting on initial exposure, but more than sufficient to find one's way around. Or to read. Beyond the platinum guardrail by which the horsemen stood, the entire center of the spire dropped hollowly away, so that the uppermost third of the edifice formed a single extended chamber. All throughout that chamber, awash in preservative and defensive magics, stood the treasures of the library itself. Everything from scrolls to bound books to graven tablets could be found upon those shelves, numbering not in the thousands, but the hundreds of thousands. Cases that were effectively freestanding walls spiraled their way up, stretching floor to ceiling. They seemed almost winding columns of smoke, or intertwining serpents, petrified and put to practical use. Numbering in their dozens, but still few and far between against the sheer length and height of shelves, the librarians and scribes of the Argent Spire went about their endless tasks. Some spent decades on end without ever leaving this chamber, cataloging, recording, altering, transcribing, protecting, repairing, and always studying. Most simply flew to whatever section of shelving they required, but for the occasional guest, or for the rare angel who preferred to walk, the library offered a system of balconies and suspended walkways. These corkscrewed along the shelves, offering a path both twisted and awkward. For even the most clever outsider, the question was not if one would get lost trying to traverse these walkways, but when and how badly. Neither death nor war believed the fairy tales of researchers who became so disoriented centuries ago that they walked the library still, desperately seeking a way out. But now that they'd seen the place, they could at least understand why such stories had spread. That the library had some rigid, meticulous system to catalog and properly place every text, Death knew the nature of angels too well to doubt. So, too, did he know them well enough to know that only those who had been educated their entire life in that system would ever prove able to master it. Thankfully, he'd been correct in assuming that Azrael would be here, attempting to discern the identity of Eden's attackers. If he hadn't been, the Horsemen would have been utterly helpless to gain anything useful from the archives of millennia. And this, according to what Azrael had proudly told them when they'd first arrived, was not even the Angel's greatest archive. It's tiny, he'd said, compared with its new sister installation. In one of our most distant outposts, where we watch over creation from beyond the gates of the White City, we're currently constructing another library, the Ivory Citadel, even more magnificent. My own personal collection will reside there eventually. The Angel's mood, however, had swiftly soured while the Horseman spoke. "I'm sorry," Azrael told them softly. "I have a difficult time imagining any angel willing to slaughter so many of his own, no matter what prize he thought Eden might offer. Is there no possibility that this is one of Abaddon's faithful, seeking vengeance for war's actions?" "With the weapon that took Abaddon's eye at Eden?" Death scoffed. "Wait a moment," War interjected, dragging his attention from the seemingly bottomless drop and back to the conversation. "Abaddon was constructing a weapon for use against Hell. It's not beyond belief that he'd be interested in the Abomination vault. Could he have faked the attack on Eden as part of a greater scheme?" "No." Azrael's tone left no room for argument. "Abaddon can be devious when necessary. It's just possible that he might even be willing to permanently maim himself in pursuit of a greater goal. But he would not be responsible for the deaths of so many under his command in a ruse. If we truly number an angel among the allies of this..." He glanced at Death. "Belisatra," the Horseman reminded him. "Yes, this Belisatra. Then I can assure you that whatever else he may be, he is not Abaddon's agent." "Then we're back to figuring out who he is," War grumbled. Azrael nodded thoughtfully. "You said he called himself Semyaza." "I did," Death said, "but if that's his real name, I'll eat Harvester. I can't imagine he'd be that foolish." "Still better to be sure." Azrael spread his wings and drifted upwards until he hovered directly over the meandering shelves. "Ikanos!" he shouted. Instantly, one of the angels, identical, so far as Death could tell, to any of the others, save for his golden robe and thin white beard, swooped up from below. "How can I serve you, my lord?" "This is Ikanos," Azrael said, floating back towards the Horseman. "He's one of our scribes, tasked with recording in the minutest detail the lives and deeds of our people. Ikanos, I trust you do not need me to identify our guests for you." "No, my lord." If the scribe felt any hostility towards War for his earlier visit, he showed no sign. Of course, it was entirely possible that he'd been in the Argent Spire this entire time and had heard no word of it. "Good. Do you know of Semyaza?" Ikanos' eyes glazed as he peered at something in the unknowable distance. "Yes," he said after a moment's thought. "Second Lieutenant to Mebehiem, commander of the Winged Lightning Phalanx. There was also, of course, the first Semyaza, in whose honor the second lieutenant is named, who was slain at the Battle of... Only the living concern us right now. Do you happen to know where Semyaza is at this moment?" "Unless he's abandoned his duties, something that would, I should stress, be very out of character, he's with the Winged Lightning as we speak. They are currently stationed at the shores of the Empty Sea, watching for any further abyssal incursion from that region." Be so kind as to send a message to Mebehiem, confirming Semyaza's presence." "Very good, my lord." Ikanos had just flexed his wings to dive when Death raised a hand. See also if you can come up with anyone with a connection to Semyaza who might have reason to use his name as an alias. He shrugged then at the 3 pairs of eyes that turned his way. It's not probable, he admitted. Odds are our friend chose the name randomly from among those angels he knew to be elsewhere. But as you said, better to be sure. Azrael nodded to Ikanos, who in turn nodded to Death, and then dropped from sight. This will take some time, Azrael said. In the interim, I will assign some of the librarians to unearthing anything they can find of this maker, Belisatra. With any luck, what we need can be found here, and you won't be forced to travel to our new outpost. And you, he continued, landing with a thump on the floor beside Death, will fulfill your promise to keep me apprised of ongoing events, starting with this Abomination vault you mentioned. Creation contains very little that I haven't at least heard of, yet the term is foreign to me. The elder brother turned briefly towards the younger, and only one who knew Death as well as War did could tell, despite the mask, what it was that Death silently demanded of him. I'm telling this my way. Do not interject. So they walked, meandering along footways between the spiraling shelves, and War remained mute while Death spoke. He told Azrael no lies, but neither was he particularly forthcoming with the details. At the conclusion of his recital, the angel still knew nothing of the Reviam, or the precise nature of the grand abominations. He knew that they were ancient Nephilim weapons of war, alive in their own peculiar way, capable of cracking worlds, that they were hidden away in a minuscule realm of their own, and that the enemy probably didn't know the means of awakening them. That, really, was more than enough. Your people, Azrael growled when the horsemen finished, have much to answer for. They've answered, Death said flatly. Then, when the angel drew breath as if to ask something further, changed the subject. Now. Azrael, perhaps the wisest of the angels, was certainly wise enough to obey. This hollow realm, he asked instead, are you certain it's secure? It's utterly outside creation, save for a single anchored portal. Yes, it's secure, and no, I will not tell you where that portal lies. I wouldn't expect you to. Azrael frowned thoughtfully. I wonder if a realm, I mean a full-sized one, a community, a nation, maybe even a world, could be locked away in a similar manner. Something to think about. He did just that, remaining silent until the peculiar trio came upon the first of the librarians, and Azrael began issuing instructions. What about the well? Death asked at one point, when it became clear that Azrael wasn't merely delegating, but planned to do much of the research himself. Can you be away this long? My duty, the angel replied, is to guard the well of souls from outside interference. It functions perfectly well without me, and until we've ended the threat of these abominations of yours, the wards I've left behind will have to prove sufficient protection. The angels, Azrael included, remained at their hunt for a good long while. Death stood utterly still, as if he'd simply stepped out of his body, or even out of time, until the task was complete. War paced, first before this one section of shelving, then ranging farther and farther out into the library. Even his footsteps somehow managed to sound impatient. If you get lost, Death called, the first words he'd spoken in hours, if not days, you're on your own. War grumbled something and went back to pacing within sight of the shelf. Ikanos returned with confirmation that yes, the true Semyaza was still with his phalanx, and no, the scribe could not come up with anyone who might have a particular reason for choosing that name to steal. And still the angels searched. It was finally Azrael himself, after a prolonged discussion with the other scribes, conducted while hunched over a table full of heaped scrolls, who brought the horsemen their answers. He glided over, bearing both a fretful grimace and a tattered parchment. Brittle, yellowed, it looked as though the slightest touch, or even a moderate breath, would set it to crumbling. Yet it held up under the angel's fingers without so much as shedding dust. "We have something," he announced, utterly unnecessarily, as he sat down once more upon the walkway. "And well past time," War said. "Absolutely," Death concurred, casually turning to face the new arrival. "Much more pacing, and I believe War would actually have worn himself shorter than he used to be." "Yes, I do apologize for taking so long," Azrael said. "It turns out there is very little written about her, and then only as a few passing references in the history of others." He trailed off, shook his head. "Well, Belisatra, or so we have it written, was the apprentice of a maker called Gulbanon." "I've heard that name," the younger horseman muttered. His brother nodded in agreement. "I'm unsurprised. Gulbanon was one of the truly ancient Old Ones. He was a master of many crafts, many magics. Some even say that he combined the arts of the forge makers with those who focus on the genesis and shaping of the living." "I cannot help but notice," he said, "your consistent use of the word was." Quite." It was Azrael now who began to pace. War and Death exchanged worried looks at the normally imperturbable angel's agitation. "Gulbanon was murdered some ages gone. As best our records show, Belisatra was never again seen in the Maker's realm, nor ever heard from after her master's death, which the other Makers presumed at the time made her either another victim or the killer," Death finished for him. "The Makers never hunted her down?" War asked. "It seems that if he was ancient and a respected member of the race, as you say, someone ought to have been seeking justice, or at least vengeance. Had it happened a few centuries earlier, they doubtless would have. At the time of his demise, however, Gulbanon was thoroughly estranged from the community and the company of his fellow Old Ones." Death lashed out with an arm, snagging Azrael by the shoulder and tugging his pacing to an abrupt halt. "All right, Azrael, this drag-it-out-of-me-line-by-line routine isn't like you. You're avoiding something." The angel smiled, though he sighed through it. "You never were one for the gentle approach, were you? I prefer to stockpile my patience rather than spend it frivolously." "All right." Azrael shrugged the hand from his shoulder. Gulbanon had taken up with a lover until shortly before his death. The other Makers disapproved vehemently of his chosen paramour. "Who?" War demanded. But Death had already turned away, once again cursing in that language so ancient even his fellow horsemen could not comprehend it. "It would seem that your brother has already guessed." War turned then to Death, who was again absently picking at the wraps on his arms. "Lilith," Death hissed at him. He didn't bother even to note Azrael's nod of confirmation. "The poor deluded fool took up with Lilith." "And if anyone has any further answers to give you regarding Belisatra," the angel said, "it would be the mother of demons herself. I fear very much, my friends, that if you're to continue on this little endeavor of yours, you've little choice but to go to hell." And that brings us to the end of Chapter 14. Some interesting answers in there. Feels like we're getting closer to putting all this together. Does spell ominous portents for next time, though, must say. But for now, I'm BurningDogFace, and I'll see you on the next episode of Let's Read Darksiders, The Abomination Vault by Ari Marmel. Till then, have yourselves a great day, Burning Dog fans. Later!